Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the next installment of the Red Hat FAA webinar series. Just want to do a quick mic check. Jeff, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear just fine, John.
Perfect. So many of you know that my name is Jonathan Beach. I am the FAA dedicated solution architect. We've been doing these webinars for a few months now, and we have another great one for you today. Ansible is one of my favorite Red Hat products to use as well as to talk about. However, today I have a really special guest to talk about automating your network. But before we get to Glenn, I'll go over some ground rules real quick. First, by default, we turn off your mic and your camera so we cannot see or hear you. We ask everyone to submit their questions in the Q&A section of the interface. You should see a Q and a button on, I believe it's your right-hand side. Just hit that button, drop a question in there. During the discussions or during the presentation today, Jeff and I will be answering questions. Glenn will also take some pauses during as well to answer the questions. And at the end, if we don't answer your question by then, we'll make sure we answer every other question or every question from that point. I will put my email address in the chat in case you guys have some offline questions you'd like to email me or the rest of the account team. I'm also going to be dropping in some other things that we'll talk about later. So let's get started, shall we? So today I welcome Glenn Sharpnack. I jinxed myself earlier. He's a senior solution architect here at Red Hat. However, before joining Red Hat, he has spent many years at Cisco. But I'll let Glenn tell us all more about himself right now. So with that, Glenn, let's automate my network.
All right, sounds great. Thank you, John. As John mentioned, my name is Glenn Sharpnack, and I am actually with the North America Public Sector Domain Architecture team, where I focus solely on Ansible, and more specifically, Ansible for network automation. It's a pleasure to be here with you today, and I look forward to your questions. And with that, I'll go ahead and start my presentation. And then one other note, I do live in a very congested area, so I'm going to go ahead and shut my video off so that my presentation doesn't lag too far behind. All right. You guys, John, can you see my screen?
I can. I will just ask if the audience can just drop something into the chat. Make sure we did have an issue with last webinar that we saw everything, but the audience could not. So just let us know in the chat. Just drop yet. We can see it. If not, let us know if you can't see the slides. But go ahead, Glenn.
Okay, thank you, John. All right, so today we're going to be talking about Ansible automation platform for network automation. And before we get too far into things, what I'd like to do is just kind of start with an overview of the Red Hat Ansible automation platform, just to make sure everybody's at the same baseline. It won't take long, just a few slides on the basics, and then we'll get into our use case. So the Ansible automation platform really has three levels to it. At the base level, we have the Ansible engine, which really performs the automation. And then next layer up, we have Ansible Tower, which helps us scale out our automation, and it also has our webhooks, it has our APIs, and has the ability to cluster and grow out and scale. And then at the top level, which you guys probably aren't too concerned about at this point, is there's this software as a service, but you need an internet connection to make that happen. So at the base layer, we have a few things that are required to make Ansible work. First, we need to have users that are going to write playbooks. Those playbooks are just a list of ordered tasks that call on modules to make automation happen. Those modules are part of the automation engine, and they automate based off of our inventory. Inventory is a list of devices that we want to make configuration changes for or to gather information from. Those are our hosts, our routers, our switches, any device really. And that inventory source could come from manually entering stuff in a flat file, or it could come from configuration management database, or it could be from a dynamic inventory source, such as AWS or Azure, any of those things. And then we have the ability to really extend the capabilities of Ansible by writing plugins. Generally, those are written in Python for our network extensions. So that's the basics in a real quick overview. Then for Ansible Tower, this is really what we use to scale out our automation so that multiple groups could use them. It's very, very common to see an operations team have access to certain automation playbooks, and then the network admins will have probably more rights and the ability to create their own automation as well. So Ansible Tower, it's our web-based UI. It's where all of our APIs live. This is extremely important for when we want to integrate with third-party applications. It gives us our role-based access control. And then when we have large network infrastructures that we want to automate against, this is when we want to scale out Tower to cluster Tower to really increase the compute power and automate more things at once. So that's the very important piece of Tower. So with Tower, besides the role-based access control, it does have the ability to have their push button launching of automation. It makes it really easy. And then we could also schedule automation to happen at certain times, maybe going out and grabbing backups of all devices out in the network to make sure we have current backups. It helps us create our source of truth. So if there's failures, then we could revert back to our last known good. And all this Tower really revolves around the concept of job templates. The job templates require 3 items to work properly. We need an inventory. That inventory could live in SCM, or it could live basically anywhere. We need credentials to log into the devices to make any automation changes. Those credentials are never seen by the users of Tower, so it's very secure in that aspect, and it's also encrypted 256 AES at rest. And then the other piece is the project. The project is where our playbooks are stored. Our best practice indicates that we should have our playbook stored in a source code management tool such as GitHub, GitLab, Subversion, anything we really could truly integrate with. But best practice is we should use some type of SCM to make sure that the current and accurate playbooks are being used. One other concept I'll touch on real quick with our Tower is the concept of using workflows. Workflows are a way to orchestrate your automation so that we could string multiple job templates, multiple automation jobs together. One of the key points with this workflow is that we could build in fault tolerance so that we see down on the bottom, if we have some automation job kicks off, here we're configuring a firewall. If that was to fail, we'd want to revert back and make sure that we have our last known good. So we're not breaking the network more than we're fixing, trying with our automation attempts. So the ability to build in fault tolerance is very powerful within Tower. Another key benefit with Tower, and this is the last one I promised for the Tower conversation at this point, is the webhooks. Webhooks really help you enable your NetGit ops. This is probably a little bit more of an advanced topic than what we're really focused on today. I was just dropping this in here for a seed for you, so that once some changes are made to your playbooks that are stored in your SCM, that could trigger a webhook to go out and change the or kick off an automation job to make the current updates and changes. So at that point, you're truly running a full-scale automation environment. All right, so that's it for the overview. Let's jump into the network automation use case. So the first question comes up: why do we want to automate our network? We've been doing the same networking concepts for 30 years. Well, and that's the problem. Managing networks hasn't really changed in 30 years. And the problem with that is we're still doing a lot of changes to our networks by using the CLI. And that opens up ourselves for fat fingering, for making human error. And that could have drastic impacts on a network. So we want to change that. And another point for that change is that networks are greatly more complex now than they were 30 years ago, especially when we start thinking about all of the overlays and underlays with the virtual data centers that we are working with today. And we really don't want to have somebody at a CCIE level trying to make manual VLAN configurations or simple SNMP changes throughout the network. They should really be focusing their time, on more strategic initiatives and streamlining network operations and network development. So that brings up the question, why Ansible for network automation? And it really comes down to three simple topics here, right? It's simple, it's powerful, and it's agentless. So going from right to left here, it's agentless. Ansible is agentless, and that means that we don't have to install any new software on a network device, which is perfect for network automation because the majority of times you cannot install software on a network host or on the network device. So agentless is the way we need to go with network automation. And then we just make our connections to our network devices using Open SSH in most cases, but it's really going to come down to the native connection method for that device. So there's no agents to exploit. There's no new security vulnerabilities by putting software on an end host. So agentless is perfect for us in network automation. The next piece is that Ansible is extremely powerful in what it could do. It could automate any platform, any networking platform. It is not vendor specific. We could be agnostic as possible. We have tons of modules to help us with this automation. And a lot of times those modules are created by the network vendors so that they're extremely powerful in what they could do for each specific vendor. And then we have the ability to extend that automation capabilities by using plugins, creating additional Python code to make things a lot more powerful. All right, and then my favorite piece of Ansible, and this is why I'm here, is because it is simple to use. It's for operators, it's for engineers, it's for developers, it's for everybody. And that's because Ansible uses the YAML language. It's a declarative language, not a programming language. So it's easy to get to get up and running with automation. It doesn't take long at all. In fact, my first exposure to Ansible was when I was working at at Cisco Systems. I was in a pre-sales capacity, and we had to do a proof of concept for a multi-tenant data center. And we gave ourselves a week to do the rack and stack of equipment, make physical connections, upgrade all the software to the versions we needed, deploy all the configurations, and test, troubleshoot, and verify everything was working. So we had a week to do that. And what we found was it took us about a day to do the rack and stack and make physical connections. And that gave us 4 days to do the rest of the configurations, test, troubleshoot, verify, and also the software upgrades. And what we found out was we were looking at multiple tools, and the one that we found to be the easiest was Ansible. And within 2 hours, once we created our playbooks, we launched our automation jobs, and with 2 hours, we had everything configured, tested, and verified and upgraded. So that gave us another 3.5 days to move on to more strategic things and focus our attention elsewhere. So it's extremely simple, it's extremely powerful, and with it being agentless, it's perfect for the network automation environment. All right, so then how does Ansible automate network devices since we can't put any code on the devices? And it really acts a little bit different than how Ansible would interact with servers, Linux servers, Windows servers, or hosts, laptops, whatever. Traditionally, Ansible would push out the code to the end host, push some Python code out there or PowerShell if it's Windows, operate on that end host, execute that code, and then delete it and move it all off. Well, since we can't add code to a network device, we execute that code locally on the control node where Ansible Tower is stored, or where Ansible Tower is configured, rather. Execute the code there, and then push the configuration changes to the device over SSH. So it's very easy in that regard. And with Ansible, this slide may be a little bit outdated because we have, still accurate, I guess, because 65 plus network platforms, all vendors interact with Red Hat since we're an open source company. They want to contribute to this platform. They understand that it's easy to work with. So other vendors help configure and contribute to our ecosystem. And then we have over 1,000 network modules to help us with automation. That may be a little bit overwhelming when we have so many different modules to work with, but they really come down to 4 different classifications. So we have command modules, which is very similar to logging into a network device, executing a command at the command line. Right? So it's very arbitrary in that regard, so that It's not really idempotent. It's just pushing a config line out to a device. So that was the first modules we had for network automation. Then we have the config modules. The config modules actually work in an idempotent fashion, so that we're trying to send a configuration to the device, but if that configuration is already there, we don't need to put it there. So it's idempotent in that regard. The next module is the fax module. This is where we could query a network device. So we query that network device, and then we return data that's structured so that we could use it any way we need to. And then the last one we have, and this is rather new, it's the resource modules. These came out, I want to say, within the last year, maybe year and a half. But this is the tool that allows us to read and configure network devices based on the resource. So maybe VLANs or just the interface, or layer 2 interface resources, layer 3 interface resources. And then we see the examples on the bottom. So, and these are all very vendor specific to make sure that we are sending the right commands to that platform. All right, so with all of these capabilities to do network automation, brings up the question, like, where do we start? What's the best way to go? Well, the best thing we could say is automation doesn't have to be all or nothing. So the best thing to do is start small, but think big, right? So as we're getting used to automating our networks, traveling down our automation journey, what we want to do is we want to start with some read-only automation. So something to help us get our quick wins, right, with no risk. We're not going to be changing anything. Maybe we're just gathering information or capturing backups. And then from there, we'll start moving a little bit further down our automation journey, and that's where we could start automating some simple configurations. So something that's not going to break the box, maybe adding some SNMP configurations, for example, or maybe just enforcing that we have certain configurations that are present. And if they're not present, then we'll push them to be on the device. And then the main point here is just don't overcomplicate things when we first get started with automation. So we just really want to follow that crawl, walk, run methodology. So in the beginning, try to do some manual automation. Then from there, jump a little bit further to where we're starting to do some configurations using the command modules and config modules. After a few days or months of doing that, then we're going to want to start becoming a little bit more DevOps aware, creating our CI/CD pipelines, and start using some resource modules. And then as we get more familiar with our automation, then we want to start moving into this DevOps essential model, where we have a source of truth. The source of truth is everything that should be on our network devices. All the configurations are going to be stored in a source of truth, and really as variables. And then we could start to become very creative using Jinja 2 templating to add some programming logic within our automation. And then further on down the road from that is where we could start developing our own plugins to really enhance our automation experience. So some common use cases that we see within the network automation realm is scheduling backups. That's generally very easy to do. It's low risk. So we'll go out, once a night or whatever your policy is, go out and make sure we have a current backup of the device. And then if a device was to go into a failure state, maybe somebody logged in to a router and made a configuration that destroyed BGP, for example, we could go back to our last known good from a timestamp and roll back that configuration and delete anything that was breaking our network. So then with that, since we're doing backups, it's a good place to start working with workflows. And we'll build those workflows so as the first job template is issued, it should be to grab a good backup. And then from there, we can make configuration changes using another template. And if that was to fail, then we'd revert back to that last known good. So we're going to be starting to build in fault tolerances within our workflows. Another very popular use case, especially in the beginning, is, beginning and more advanced, is we want to make sure we have configuration compliance. This could have something to do with any configurations, maybe for legal purposes, so make sure we have a banner that that was given to us by our legal teams, or our security teams. And then with this, we could track any configuration drifts. And if something was changed that needed to be reverted, we could automate that task from doing that. And then another use case that's very popular in the beginning of your automation journey is creating dynamic documentation. And I'll show a demo of doing this too, from building a report, going out to all the different networking vendors in our network, grabbing information, even though they're on different platforms, and then arranging that information in a human readable fashion. All right, and then one thing that's just a critical, very critical concept within network automation is creating the source of truth. And this is really for any automation that we have, is we want to create a source of truth to make sure that we have the ability to start moving into operating our network as infrastructure as code. To do that, we're grabbing the data from our network devices, we're structuring it into some types of variables, and then from that point on, instead of logging into a device manually and making changes, all we have to do is go to our source of truth, and then we can make our configuration changes by changing a variable and then pushing those variables out to the network devices. So it really helps us move into operating our networks in a very agnostic data model. To create your source of truth, what we do is we go out to the different devices, we grab information, right? So we're gathering facts. We're going to use the facts modules to do this. Then we're going to convert those facts into a structured data model and then store that information in a host variables file within the SCM. So here's an example of doing that. We have, so before I get too far into this, I'll point out that Ansible does have this gather facts that runs, and this is the first one, this generic gather facts. This is really based for servers. We don't use that within the networking realm, okay? What we have to use is the vendor-specific facts module. So in this case, what do we have here? An Arista device, EOS facts. So we're gathering the facts, all of the network resources, and then we're going to push that structured data to a file, to a host vars file. And that's all we're doing. We're collecting the facts, structuring that data, and then storing the data. So here's an example of what that data would look like after we captured it and pushed it into a host vars file. So here we are looking at the host vars for router 2. So router 2, we have all of these interfaces configured, Ethernet 1, the MTU stored, and it's enabled, so it's on. Loopback 0, loopback 1, so on and so forth. And then the VLANs that are associated on the device as well. Keep in mind that these could be used by resource modules, so that there's a resource module for VLAN, so that would grab that VLAN information and automate as needed. All right, each resource can be treated individually as well, so that when we're automating our configurations, we have the different resource modules that are being used. So interface resource module, layer 2 interfaces is another resource module, layer 3 VLAN, so that all we have to do is go in and reference the interfaces variable. So I'm going to jump back once we have the interfaces variable, L2 interface, L3 interface, and VLAN. But if we go back, we should see some of that. Well, we see the interfaces and VLANs. I did cut out the rest of the output just because it's incredibly long. All right, and then when the playbook runs, we'll see that reference within Ansible Tower or within our output of playbook commands. So keep in mind too that there is the stoplight theory within Ansible, so that when we run a playbook, if we see the color green, we know that nothing was changed on the device. If there was a color yellow, we know something was changed. Good or bad, something was changed. It doesn't mean anything's bad. It doesn't mean anything's good. It just tells us quickly by a color scheme that something was changed. And then if there was something that was returned in red, we know that that's an error, and that's where we need to start troubleshooting. All All right, and then one of the most powerful things with the Ansible automation platform is the ability to have third-party integrations. So the third-party integrations allow us to work with third-party applications, maybe ServiceNow, maybe the Cisco ACI controller, maybe SDN controllers. Could work with other automation tools so that we could act as an orchestration device for other automation tools. It really truly is the feature that truly extends our network automation capabilities into really anything that our imagination will allow us to think of to automate. All right, different types of automation. So we have automate the automators so that we could interact with other controllers with APIs. We could interact with our source code management tools so that we could have our staging or development environment separate from our production environment to really help us create a CI/CD pipeline so that when we make changes or if we're testing things in our networks, we could iterate fast, fail fast, revert fast, and make sure that we have minimal downtime if that was to ever happen. And then the other piece is business workflows. One of the demonstrations I'll show here in a few minutes is the ability to integrate with ServiceNow to do ticketing, creates tickets, and then there's some business logic that I'll call back into the tower to remediate some configurations issues. All right, so let's jump right into the demonstration now. I'm going to stop sharing this presentation. How are we doing on questions, Q&As? Let's pause for a second.
We look good, Glenn. No questions.
Okay. All right, good deal. Just bear with me here while I'm changing screens. Let me know when you could see my Ansible tower. Think we have it? Telling me that I'm sharing. John, can you see my screen?
We could see it here, Glenn.
Okay, good. Excellent. All right, so the first thing I want to show you is I'm going to log into my Cisco device, and we see that there are no banners configured, and this is going to be a security compliance issue. So what I'm going to do is go to my tower, go to my templates, and this is something that could be scheduled. Or if there's any times that you want to go out and make sure that there's no configuration issues, we could go ahead and do a compliance check. So I have a template here for compliance checking, and what this is going to do, it's going to use APIs for a couple different things. The first is it's going to integrate with Slack so that as I launch this automation, the playbook runs, it goes out, it checks for compliance issues. Okay, so first thing it's doing is looking to see if the banner's there. If it's not, it's going to create a ServiceNow ticket. From there, I receive a Slack notification that my router is out of compliance. It creates a ServiceNow ticket. So if I go to ServiceNow, we will see, let's see, this was ticket 93. Log in real quick. This takes a second to load. So the ticket was 93. So let's go to incident. It all. Here we see incident 93. Dig in a little bit deeper to here. So first thing that happens, we see that it was out of compliance. We created the ticket. And then from there, ServiceNow reached back into Ansible Tower to tell it what was wrong and to run some automation. So once that automation was kicked off, we'll go back to our jobs, and it's running a compliance fix automation. Once that compliance fix automation was ran, it signaled back to to ServiceNow telling, hey, we fixed it. So then ServiceNow closed out the ticket after it was remedied. And then we see the notification for resolving and closing the incident there. All right, so that's where we want to get to in our end game of automation, just having everything completely automated. And some other things that we could do, here we have the ability to schedule things, right? So in our job schedule, one thing that we do is we generate a daily network report. I have a multi-vendor network set up, and I'll go ahead and run this now. So I'll go back to my templates and generate a daily report. This is once again calling a couple different methods here. So we're going to use the survey to pass in some information. This is for my Slack channel. Automation kicks off. It's going out to each individual network device, gathering using the facts module to gather the facts, reads all of the information. It structures that data, and then it's going to push that data to a human readable website so that if you need a daily report or a weekly report, management will quickly be able to log in, see when everything was gathered, and from there give update statuses. And here the report was kicked off, and we log in. We see that we have Arista devices with different interfaces. So we have the interfaces that are configured, layer 3 interfaces. We see what the platform is, what version of code that's running, and serial numbers. And this is rather powerful if you have anytime you have an RMA, clearly your documentation is going to change on which device is out in the network. So this is a quick way to gather that information and store that information so it's always up to date. Okay. Another use case that we had is configuring another different device. So I'm not sure if you guys use F5. Within F5, there is a couple of different ways to configure your load balancers through the Ansible automation platform. One is using the traditional modules that are going to call APIs. Another way is to use the templating engine to do these configurations. So as I log in, I'm just going to try to look at all of our configurations. Bear with me, it's a little slow. So we don't have anything configured at this point. And I have this template here built to ask through a survey, prompt us which way do we want to configure, which method do we want to use to configure our F5 device. So we have non-AS3 or the AS3 method. So I'm going to use non-AS3 the first go around. We'll launch this real quick, and then we'll see some configuration changes. So we're creating nodes. One of the best things about Ansible Tower, within Ansible, is as you're creating your playbooks, you make them in a very human readable fashion because it's this declarative language, right? So we have the ability to do self-documentation. So with with each task we run, we could make a human readable name to tell us what that task is doing. So as you open up a playbook, you could quickly see what each automation task is doing. And then if there's a failure, you'll see which task failed, and it gives you a starting point for your troubleshooting. All right, so as this runs, I will please share some code with us to see how this works. So the first thing is we have I'm using roles to do this automation. So roles are a way to make automation easily repeatable and easily shareable. And it's a very elegant way to configure your automation. So here I just import a role named configure F5, and then it's going to send a Slack message once it's done. So, but it calls on the role configure F5. That role is here, and then from the tasks, I have the first task is set up based off of the F5 status. Do we want to use AS3 or non-AS3? I have it defaulted to AS3 or non-AS3, and then it calls on this task file here. In this task file, we see the first step is create the nodes. Then it's going to create the pool, add members to the pool, then add virtual servers, then save the running configs, and then spit out some information from the facts that are gathered. And looks like we're stuck here a little bit. All right, anyhow, the other option is to do the AS3 method for configuration. AS3 method does something a little bit different where we're just posting based off of a template. So we're using the URI module, still interacting with APIs on the F5 device, and we just post the configurations through a template, which is stored under our templates folder, which is right here. So we're using a JSON template to push, or using JSON to push these configurations over, and it's a whole lot quicker than doing the traditional method. Let's see where we're at on our job here. I'm just going to kick off the F5 automation, the non-AS3 method, or the AS3 method rather, and we should see that this is a whole lot quicker. I think my F5 device may be sleeping or dead. Well, as that's still working, what I'll do quickly is log out of my Cisco device and log back in. And there we see that we automated the configurations of adding those banners for our legal disclaimers, and also gathered information for the message of the day with the model number and serial number and what version of software we're running. So that it's all displayed as we log into the device. All right, so my F5 device may have died on us. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to stop sharing for a little bit, and then we'll point out that there is some outstanding documentation that I always want to highlight for everybody when it comes to network automation. One of the things that truly intrigued me about Red Hat Ansible Automation Platform is the documentation and the ease of using the documentation. It is extremely well written. It's extremely easy to find what we're looking for in our automation journey. So for the network automation, there's a shortened link here that you could quickly go to for figuring out anything you need to learn about network automation using Ansible. It has basic concepts, and then it digs a little bit deeper. The documentation is available to you both in on the internet for free, and then also for online use. You have the ability to just do Ansible docs if you're in a disconnected environment. So you could look for your documentation no matter where you are. And then as far as the documentation goes, when you're getting spun up and learning how to do network automation, the best thing that I could tell you, when you need to revert to documentation to figure out how to use a module, the best way to do it is first to go look at the examples to see how they are used. And then from there, you could scroll back up and then look into the different fields for what's expected. But for me, when I was getting started, the best way to use the documentation was to see the examples and then figure out what fields I needed from that. And then run in a test environment, see how playbooks work, see what facts are gathered, see how I could gather that information, structure that data, and use it in some fashion. All right, so that's about all I really wanted to show for this webinar. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen, take a look at the Q&A section. The first one was just we could see. Next question. When the Ansible controller deploys modules on a node, does the Python script on the node continue to execute even if the SSH connection is broken for some reason? Looks like we had 2 replies already. Oh, hey, Gerald's there. So Gerald answered those. Appreciate that, Gerald. Is there a way to roll back the changes made by a template? Yes. So Alan, the way to roll back those changes is to use a workflow, and then from there you could you could go back and push out the last known good configuration. That's the best way to do that. Let me pull up another example here. It's not necessarily a network example, but it will be a way to show you how to do that with using a template. Templates. All right, so with this workflow, we were configuring multiple devices, doing a multi-cloud deployment. So when I zoom in, we'll see that we have step one, we're doing provisioning AWS, and then we have fault tolerances built in. So when we're building our workflow, we'll say, okay, if this first job template is successful, what do we want to do next? So the next thing we were doing in this case was running another job template. And then if we have a failure, we're going to tear down and have some way of handling that failure. So we just tear everything down. In the network space, if you were to have a workflow, the first thing you'd want to do is grab a backup, right? And then maybe make some configuration changes, add some security. And then if you had a failure along the way, then you would revert back to the backup that, your golden config, your source of truth. Let's see, next question. Is there documentation for best practices on projects, organization, and teams in Ansible Tower? There is best practices. So if we just do a quick Google search for Ansible doc best practices. And from here, you could scroll down and just really dig into what we should have for directory layout, where we should store variables, where roles should be, really just the best practices all around, how to separate dev environments from production environments. That's just one of the great things about the Ansible documentation. That's easy to read, easy to find, and it really is all-encompassing. Coming from a different vendor where documentation has just kind of seems like it's all over the place, it's really an amazing platform when it comes to looking things up within Ansible. And I think that was the last of the questions. So I'll hand things back over to John.
All right, Glenn. So real quick, when you started, or maybe it was midway through, you had a picture of it looked like a rat nest of networking cables. So that brings back a lot of painful memories, and everybody at the tech center on the call will know if you pop one of those tiles in the labs, that's sort of what we used to see. So yeah, that was funny. But I want to thank a few people for making this happen today. First, thanks to Glenn. That was great. I love seeing the networking demo part. It's something I can't do on my own. I don't have the equipment. Thank you for taking the time to do this for us today. As with most of our webinars, Jeff Thompson has done a lot behind the scenes. He's been sending out the invites. So thank you, Jeff. Also, our partners, CDW and DLT, for taking the time to help us present these webinars, pushing out invites as well. We really do appreciate the team effort here on the Red Hat side, as well as our partners. I will like to plug our next webinar on April 8th. Sebastian Dunn will be coming back. He's going to talk about bringing RHEL, Red Hat Enterprise Linux, to the edge. I think that's a really neat topic on where it's really going. So again, that's April 8th at 11 a.m. If you haven't gotten the invite, we'll be sending them out shortly. Another plug, Red Hat Summit. I posted that link in the chat. That is April 27th to 28th. It is virtual this year. It is also free this year. I urge, even if you can't make it the 27th or 28th, if you sign up, you can go back and watch any of the videos, sort of like our video today. And that being said, this webinar is recorded. It is posted on the DLT portal. You can also reach out to me and get the YouTube link if you need it. I suggest you sharing it out to the rest of your team or your management. Say, listen, we need Ansible. We need to do this. So it's really, really important that everybody sees what Ansible is capable of doing. So with that, myself and the rest of the Red Hat account team, we thank everyone for coming today, and I will give you back a few minutes of your day. I don't want to stop you from eating lunch, and again, we'll see you in 2 weeks. Thanks, everyone.